I'm very proud that we've been able to bring to the Leaders Summit Peter Nilsson and Chaz Jacobsen. That both of them have been pioneers in the sector, but particularly Chaz, who, with 4 or 5 other individuals, in effect created the Retirement Village Act that we all now have as consumer protection and industry protection. And he has agreed to come and speak to us today, which is the first time in 25 years, because he has very strong feelings as to what is going to work going forward and also what is not. So I'd like to invite Peter and Chaz.
We were asked to advise on the Act, and that in 1986 was the best thing for the industry because it gave some surety to the industry in general. Just before that, the government introduced the securities licence because they said we were dealing in securities. So we all had to go and get security licences for about a 3-year period until the Act kicked in and the various conditions in the Act became law. So that was a brief overview of where the industry was, but listening today, the village we wanted to create was this real estate option, somewhere where you got freed up for time, where you could join a village and the boat or the caravan or whatever you wanted to pursue. And I can tell a little story of my in-laws of the time. They were keen caravanners, they were keen lavatory fans, and they played bowls. So for 6 months of the year they'd head off to Queensland. I got the job of the repairs when the branch fell on the roof or cutting the grass. Somebody else got the job of switching the lights on and off. They'd come back, put the caravan on the front lawn, the weeds would grow up through the wheels, the neighbour would scream, when are you going to move that van? It took me 10 years to get them to move into the village. They lasted with the van where they could have parked the van behind in the boat and caravan storage area, rung us from Queensland, we turned the air conditioner on, gardens are cut, lawns are done, broken roof tiles been fixed. Just this freedom to travel. And listening today, we're losing that part of the village because we battled for years with our advertising in the RVA to try and convince the consumer that this was this real estate option. Now, there's a new type of village, which we'll no doubt speak on with Chris's questions, is emerging, but we don't want to lose this real estate option because we need this younger person to run the village, to be vibrant, and they contribute so much to the running of the village by way of running the shop. Our residents run the shop, they make $100,000 out of it, which they pour back into funds. We have a golf committee that looks up to 250 of our residents in a golf club. We've got people do china painting and teach. All these skills that you run your village on, we don't want to lose that because if we've got to put paid staff back in, your service fee is going to go through the roof. And that's another strong point I want to talk on is the cost of living in this new village as we go forward. So very briefly, Chris, that's what it is.
Thank you. Thank you, Chad. Just out of curiosity, before we get on to the village of today, how did the DMF occur? Because we know it, but we don't know how it came about.
Well, as I said, we used to try and pinch the contracts from the other villages to try and nut it out. What we did, we took everyone's program and got an actuary to run them all through. What I found was that they were complicated. You know, it's 3 3/4% for 12 months, and then it's 1.5% for this, and we do this and we do that. And I thought there must be, and what's the lifetime occupancy? And when we first went into it, there was the Baptist Centre at Frankston, Reverend Bod Payne, and that was a very large village, still in existence. And everyone, because we had no data, you're lucky, you've got all this statistical data. You can go back 35 years and the computers can progress it into the future. But we didn't have this, so we thought the average life turnover of the villas would be 8 or 9 years. And then it had to be readjusted to 12 to 13. And because we were getting people in the 65 bracket, it was actually 18 or 19 years. So we put all this in the computer and spat it out. We thought, right, how do we put together a simple thing? So we just come up with 80-20, which was 80% you get back 80% of your capital gain and 20% of any capital gain. Now, it's simple, very simple. If you've paid $100,000 and it doubles, you've got back 100,000, we've got 100,000.
So, Chad, are you saying this is your DMF model today, is it? Still
the same, exactly, never altered it.
So, can you just explain to us, because I understand that you have quite a unique situation. A person who, your product offering when it's a DMF is, you move into the village, how long can you, what happens to the DMF?
We believe that you should have a 12-month settling in period. We've had that from day one, because you don't want that resident to be trapped or contained. It's not the sort of resident you want. So rather than 3 months, we costed into it that you had 12 months. So with us, we used to take, I think, $200 deposit. We'd forget who paid it to us. It was more a pain in the butt to try and pay it back. So we cut out deposits. So you came along, you reserved a unit, you put no money down, the unit was locked in for a period of time for you to sell your place. You moved in, you paid your entry fee. You had 12 months to settle into the village. If you didn't like it, we gave you money back. And so we charged you $50 a week for rent, which was just a peppercorn figure that we put into it, and the person would move on. The advantage of that to us was we didn't have the person had 12 months to adjust, so we thought that was a fair and reasonable time before you committed to this new type of community living. And we're back now in 1980, so people had to get used to when they came into the villages, if they were lease, licence, strata, whatever. It was a different phraseology. They were used to getting a title and holding it in their hand. So the 12-month settling in period was, and we still have that today, and our formula is still the same, and we've never been challenged once in 35 years on our formula.
So your DMF model is nothing for 12 months, except for perhaps $50 a week.
Correct.
12 months and 1 day, straight to 20%.
20%, yeah.
Does it move from there?
No, it stays at that. Just stays. It's 80% of the ingoing and then 20% of any capital appreciation. Now that might seem aggressive, but you've got to understand that the facilities that we put into the village took us probably 2 cycles to get reimbursed for. So whilst it looks an aggressive payment for the first people, you're only then just recouping your capital expenditure. So we probably went 20 years before we made a profit. So we ran the business, in fact, contributed a lot of funds directly to the village in respect to the service charge. Because we were builders and contractors, we had all the equipment on site. So we've been building in the one village for 35 years and we haven't finished. We've still got another 2 stages to go.
So that's very generous of you to operate at a loss or not at a profit for 20 years. Today, can an operator afford to do that? And what do you recommend should be the business case today? What should the retirement village look like today?
Well, firstly, the first question was the financial side. The answer is yes, but unfortunately with the larger organisations, particularly if they become public and such, you've got shareholders or you've got other people with financial interests that may not want to look at something that doesn't show a return for 20 years. Keep in mind that the residents are living longer. Our average, Pete's our statistic man, I suppose, 12, 13 years, Pete?
Up until 5 years ago, the average stay was 12 years. And the last 5 years, it's dropped to 8 or 9. And when you first built the village, the average age of entry was 65. In the late 80s, 90s and the early 2000s, the average age of entry was 71. It's now 79. So obviously if they're coming in later, their age, obviously people are living longer, there's no doubt about that.
So Peter, that must be good for a DMF that goes straight to 20%.
Excellent.
Somebody's got to pay for my Ferrari. It wasn't set up that way. It was set up for simplicity because we expected the people to live with us for 18 to 20 years. May I say, we just opened a large facility in Melbourne. We still have the 7th resident that moved into our village in 1981 living with us. Still lives in the village, and we had her cut the ribbon and open it. We had another resident that was the following year. So they've been with us. So if you looked at that, then the return on that would be totally different. Sure, would we use the same formula? I don't know. To answer your question, would an organisation wait? Well, you know, it's a long term to have that capital expenditure, and that's the hard part of going to a bank to borrow the money. You're not going to be cash flow positive for X period of time. But if you're going to put in the recreational and the social, and now listening to the contributions today, put in the health side of things that you need underlying all this, then you're going to have to spend a longer time recouping that capital expenditure.
So what is the village today that you would build? I know you've got strong thoughts on this.
Well, I don't want to lose sight of the freeing up and we argued, we didn't argue, we pursued another name. Retirement Village was the wrong name. From the 80s and 90s and the year 2000s, we could never come up with it. Leisure Village, Resort, whatever. There's never been a name. Maybe retirement name is probably apt if we're going in and tying a close relationship with their following aged care. So what would I build tomorrow? I would... The big problem first off is your site, because you've got to get a level site. From the disability point of view, you try and build to the handicap code, and I mean that in 120 acres we don't have one step, so we've taken that out. In the village, I think you've got to look at some of the handicap code and adapt that into your village so that you're ready for that agent, that resident that just needs to get a walking frame into the shower recess, that he's not standing like this or a glass screen is in the way. You've got to have that flexibility. Toilets, we've used handicapped toilets for 35 years. I think they should be mandatory in all family homes, to be quite honest. People that may have an injury or something just using the toilet. The village of tomorrow, I would definitely build into it a daycare facility. In our new aged care facility, we're pioneering a daycare centre where for respite you can come in for the day. So that would be a very simple additive that I would put into the village, because it would then start to address the ageing in place in respect to the village. I would definitely try and align yourself. It is essential. And if I can go back 30 years, buried in the trees of the Village Glen was the 60-bed Coleman Park nursing home. I didn't have a clue what it was meant, but something told me I had a responsibility to provide ongoing care. And so the aged care facility was there. We ended up buying it 32 years later, knocking it over, building a 170-bed, $40 million we spent on it. Aged care, which is state-of-the-art, 6-star, whatever. Not just for our residents, for the community in general. So the site that you pick has to either cope on-site or close proximity to an aged care facility. If you can find the land and you can get a village of 200-odd villas, I would be looking for, and I would be looking for some space to put a facility on, or in conjunction or in partnership with somebody else that you can share. You have to allow for mum and dad. Dad has a stroke, mum doesn't drive, and the nearest bed allocation is 30 k's away, and the bus services on the peninsula, particularly where we are, how do they visit? So you have that as a responsibility as a village operator. So I'd certainly make that, the very basis of our criteria.
What about the typical ILU? You told me that you have a 6x6 rule.
Yeah. Look, I go into some villages and I just like to get I use the term architect very, very prizingly. There's about 6 of them in Australia, in my opinion, and you just got to find one of them. Look, how can you build something where you can't back out of a garage without smashing the downpipes up on the garages behind, or you've got to run over the garden bed to turn your car around? So, I feel very strongly. So we have this 6x6x6 rule. The face of the villa is set 6 metres from the curb. The curb is 6 metres wide, road to road, 6 metres to the next one. So you've created a suburban environment in your village. It's not this maximum density type situation. We then have another rule. We have a magnificent village being built in opposition to us in another municipality close to us. Paling fence, 1,200 off the boundary. Paling fence, 1,200 off the boundary. We keep our villas 6 metres apart. So, and my perfect styled unit is, I don't know what you call them in this state, duplex or masonette, 2 villas together. If you go through our village, it's almost like a history of design. We started with what's called, I call them chook pens, and one of our opposition used to build 12 or 13 in a row. They were horrible. We said we won't do that. So we started with just 5, but the uniqueness we did, we built them around an ellipse. So it became a minity, what we call a cluster. So around a cluster is 12 or 13 units. So the people identified at that cluster. What we did, we used the same brick for 800 houses, but we changed the roof colour. So a cluster had a change of identity in it. And so we learned where we put 4 or 5 together in the detached garage. when you come down to our stage 3, we built 2 villas connected with the garages in between. So therefore, you got the sound barrier because of the garages, so you didn't get any noise transference. You've got a parking space on the apron out the front for every visitor. So if you've got a 100-unit village and you're battling the council and off-street parking, you don't have to worry about it because you've got one in front of every villa. So you've got a 100-unit village, 100 car parks, just like that, cost you nothing. So the 6 metre rule applied then between the villas. So 6 metre, 6 metre, 6 metre, and then 6 metre apart allows us to have this nice landscape. No fences, everything's done with landscaping. Now, the fronts of the units, obviously, to make it more interesting, the road gets a bit of a sweep so the units don't line up like chook pens, they step back. If I was building another village, I certainly wouldn't change it. I'd stay with my duplex model, as I call it, which is just a pair of units.
Now, you're down on the Mornington Peninsula at Rosebud, so your catchment area is quite wealthy, but at times?
We sold our first villa for $26,000 and the local real estate was $32,000. We now sell that same unit for $450,000.
Is that a 32-year-old villa?
That's a 32-year-old villa. That's a 32.
How many square metres?
Oh, the original ones, I have to say in squares, not metres, on the old style. So that was about 8 squares. Now the resident, the consumer's demanding 12, 13, 14, 15. Our catchword used to be sell the big family home, get away from the 2 bathrooms. Now they're asking for powder room, computer room. They want a second bathroom, they want a sunroom. So we're really building another family home. You're just replacing a new product for an old product.
Well, that's still a reasonably expensive ILU. If you look at Aveo, for instance, or Stockland, there's, their average is $350,000, across the country. So it's up there in price. Where I'm going is that you've got a 20% DMF. But I'm aware that you've got a very strong attitude towards the pension and the fees, the recurrent charges. So I know, Peter, to bring you into the conversation, you've got a rule, don't you, when a new prospective resident comes into the sales office? What's the first thing that you show them?
Oh, the first thing I tell them, rather than show them, is all the reasons why they shouldn't buy, which is the DMF. So we get that off the table straight away. We explain to them this is not an investment in property option. It's an investment in their lifestyle, in their care in the community. And I say to them straight away, and that's the reason you're sitting there, isn't it? And they go, yes, it is. So we get past that straight away. Then I talk about I say that we have a very comprehensive brochure. And the second thing I say to them is this brochure, one of the parts that's most important to them at the first occasion is we have a 46 questions and answers thing that Chaz drafted many years ago. It's very comprehensive. It's warts and all of why or why not you would move into the Village Glen. And there are 2 items in it which are of financial nature. One of them is the DMF, so I talk about that, and the other one is the monthly service fee. And then I say to them, everything else, if this doesn't work for you, nothing will, so ta-da. Or if this works for you, we can talk further, and the journey we're now on might take us anything from a year to 5 years before you become a resident. So we get that off the table. Then I talk about the service fee, and I say to them, in social planning, there's a theory that if you're spending more than 30% of your income, no matter if you're a pensioner or whatever, on rent or mortgage or whatever, it starts to affect your lifestyle. So the service fee is a very important component of your village, because Chaz told me a long time ago, Peter, people can afford to live in our village because they're selling their house. The capital cost of moving in is not a problem for them. They worry like heck about the ongoing cost of staying in the village, particularly because there is a DMF, and if they find they can't afford to stay, they can't get out after the 2 years we talked about before. So one of the things that my team focus on totally is how to keep that service fee affordable. The service fee currently represents 23% of the single pension, 23%, and the service fee pays for all of their rates. It pays to pension concession level, and that's 80% of our residents, so there is no rate. It pays for their house and contents insurance, and it does what we all do is all the maintenance in the village. So for 23% of the single pension, which is about $18,000 or $19,000 a year, people can live in our village. And we spend a lot of time making sure that that figure does not go up. In fact, 10 years ago, it was 27%. It is now 23%. One of the things that we did to do that, well, we were the first village in Australia to be an embedded power network. And when we talked about that, it was Jeff Kennett, the great Jeff Kennett from Victoria, decided he's going to deregulate the power market. And I saw an opportunity, and I said to Chaz, we need to do this. And Chaz, there is an opportunity for us to become a power retailer and make a surplus, if you like, make a profit. That profit must go into the service fee to keep it low, and that's what we did, and that's been our rationale ever since. So we've done a number of things with regards of the service fee. So Chaz said to me at the time, I'm happy with my DMF, that's my business model, the Village Glen this is my business, we must now make it available for people to live here and afford to live here and not worry about staying here. And that's, in essence, the story about the two things we do financially. And Chaz has always said to me, the service fee must be affordable.
One thing I'd like to say to you out there is moving forward with the consumer pay and this added health services we're going to have to offer, we've got to look at, as Peter said, the cost of living in the actual village. And I think some of us are too greedy, and don't criticise me for my 80-20 and say you're a hypocrite there, but how many of you got embedded networks in your village? How many give the whole 100% saving to your service fee back to your residents? Great. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's essential that that's what we do, is that we look at keeping this service fee, as Peter said, affordable, because there's going to be more costs on us to run the village, which we can't hand on. We're going to have to do that to attract the consumer in the first place. And so we have to look at other things. And we think we're getting quite aggressive about going into a community care package. You know, we have 800 people living in our village. We probably have 50 or 60 packages in there from other suppliers. What we want to do is we've already registered a business, and we will start and apply for the community care package, because the house or the village is just another extension of Rosebud. It's just another street in Rosebud. And so it's no different for us to put that into the village. So any profit that we make out of that particular operation in our village, we will probably roll back into the service fee to make it affordable. So anything we can do, from the embedded network to the provision of say, a care package within the village, and a couple of other initiatives we're looking at, we work aggressively at that to actually keep the place affordable. It's super essential.
So if I could summarise that, the service fee must not go above 30% of the pension?
Oh, maximum.
Maximum. And
that's with, if I may say, that's with rates and insurance in. When you start analysing this, it would be very nice to be dodging council increases in rates, which you all know. You've all got houses and you know how much you're paying. Have a look at your water rates next time, and have a look what water's costing you. So it's essential that that's in the package, in that 30%.
And aged care must be on location or close by?
Oh, I think it's a responsibility. If you take on the care of somebody to build the village, and they're easy to look after, it's a pleasure to go to work. We've got so many people contributing to the village, so it's essential that we get this lower mix. That is super essential, Chris. And I think you have the responsibility. Just visualise it's your own mum and dad, and dad has a stroke and has to go into a nursing home, and you've got to go 30 miles. How does mum get to visit if there's no public transport? You know, so, and it's interesting. When we built the village, we built an apartment building with 42 apartments in it, and everyone loved them, but no one wanted to go there, because that's where you go when you get old. We want to stay in the villa. We don't want to go in there. Now, next to this, we've got a $40 million aged care facility, but we changed things. We're not in the aged care industry. We're in the hospitality industry. So this building is built as good as this building here. That's what we try and present to our consumer. As a reward for trusting us back in 1978, 79, if you need aged care, we're going to give you Rolls-Royce aged care. That's the bricks and mortar, that's easy. The TLC and the nursing side of it is a real challenge to get the staff to do all the things that much more qualified speakers than myself are looking at as to how we get the staff and the skill level in there. But it is essential that you take the responsibility of how you get your resident to still stay. And you've asked them to come and trust you. You've taken their entry fee and you've created this lifestyle, and then you destroy it if you can't provide that continuity. You have that as a responsibility.
How would you typify the perfect village manager? Not looking to your left.
Just one here. Oh, look, I'm lucky. I've got 7 members of my family working in the village. So we've got our own, my granddaughter's working within the village, so we see managerial skills there. Look, you've got to be a people's person. Up until 3 years ago, I went to every resident meeting for the last 30 years. I never missed a meeting. So management's got to make itself available. If you're running multi-villages, just think of the thrill the residents would get if you got off your butt and went down to the village meeting and sat in the meeting and had a cup of tea with them. I think you have a responsibility. So in our establishment, the manager is my daughter. Peter is general manager, but she's totally integrated with the residents, and it's essential that they can knock on a door and see that person, and the counselling that you do with the person. It's just not it's a lifestyle. You just get absorbed with it. And they'll absorb as much time as you'll give them. So it's got to be a dedicated person. Aged care's, the people that work there, it's a very low paid. I was talking to a gentleman before, and the personal care attendants is one of the lowest paid persons in the healthcare department. They could go and work as a waitress in town or whatever, waiter, and earn probably another, $23, $24. So from a manager's point of view, you've got to be a people's person. You've just got to be that sort of thing. And it can be young. My young granddaughter, I reckon she'd be managing the village in 12 months. The kids out there are just fantastic. They're just on the ball, and it's very rewarding as a grandparent to know that you've got that structure coming through. So you need to train these people through. I get disappointed when you advertise a job and you get a person and they give you their history in 2 years, 18 months, 12 months, 18 months. Sure, they're getting the experience, but as an employer, most of our staff have been with us 12, 14, 15 years. So you get that continuity. You've got to have that continuity. Okay.
And you mentioned at the very beginning that 4 or 5 of you got together. It's almost collusive practice, but 4 or 5 of you got together, and in previous conversations we've discussed how you shape the industry, the message for the industry. Today we've been discussing that that is perhaps missing at this point in time in the sector, and it's got to happen again. Have you got a view on that, how we should be positioning ourselves? How we should go about that?
Oh, it's so big now, isn't it? I mean, when we started, there were 5 villages in Melbourne, 5 or 6 villages. Now, I'd hate to add it up, 100, 150, I suppose.
400 in Victoria.
400 in Victoria. Bit hard to get everyone in the one room, and I'm not going to pay for the counter lunch for that lot. Look, nothing changes in business. We're sitting here discussing aged care. It wouldn't matter if we were discussing putting together a holiday home consort somewhere, or a shipping business, or an airline, or something like that. There's basic business principles. I think the association does a great job, whether it went from the RVA and as business council. I think they do a fantastic job. They've probably got stronger influence back. But I would just don't lose sight of the common man, I suppose. There's not too many sole traders left out there that haven't been gobbled up, I suppose, for whatever reasons. I guess keeping the communication lines open. We don't necessarily follow. We'd like to think we lead with initiatives. So, and I think, I've made sure that we've always had a representative on any committee. So starting from the RVA, I was one of 4 or 5 people that started that, and we stayed with that right through. I did a stint at the chairmanship. When I didn't want to take it any further, Peter took it over. Peter carried it forward. He was chairman for a while. and then it went to the RVAA, which was the Australian organisation. Can I point out there before where I think one of our previous speakers said the old RVA was in bad terms. When it left Victoria, it had a big fat balance cheque from Victoria. So when we handed over from Victoria to the national body, and now it's gone to another level again. So I think that's good, healthy growth and good representation. But we've always had somebody, and Peter sits on that committee. So for 35 years, we've had someone at the peak body in Australia.
Peter, do you have a view on that?
On the RVA and the RLC?
The industry moving forward, how are we going to...
Yeah, I do have a view on that. I think we haven't got our peak body right yet. My personal view is that if I think back 10 years to the RVA, about when it went national, in Victoria, and I can't speak for other states, but in Victoria, we'd have 5 or 6 occasions a year where managers would get together in villages and just chew the fat about whatever the problems were. We've lost all that. I used to know in Victoria most of the managers in the village because we used to see them at these functions. We're not good at doing that at the moment. That's a major problem, I think, for our industry. I've had those discussions with Mary and she agrees. Her first year's been on the advocacy side, I remember our very first meeting at RLC, I asked the question of the chairman, what's our marketing strategy? And they all looked at me as if I was speaking French. What do you mean marketing strategy? We're here for advocacy. Well, my view is our peak body should be the people who are singing from the treetops what we offer. And I think that's coming around now, so that we are now talking about marketing strategy. So advocacy, obviously very important with regulations, etc. But a very big part of our industry is the peak body speaking on behalf of all of us to the public about what we offer. And that's going to support all our smaller operators as well. So the big operators, the consolidation that's gone on, certainly those people have they have large marketing budgets, but a lot of our colleagues do not have large marketing budgets, and they're relying on their membership of the RLC, if you like, to provide them with that leg up in terms of marketing and putting their name in front of their public within their regions. That's a bit we're not getting right just yet, but there's enough of us around the table to think that we have to do that. But why I sort of winked at you a minute ago, one of my observations, you asked Chaz about villages moving forward. One of my observations in terms of how Chaz has run his business, and I've been with him for 23 years now, is right from day one, Chaz empowered me. And Chaz empowers our other staff. If I've got a comment on a way forward in this industry, my personal view is that if you like, our clients or all of our villages, even though the brands are very important, the village manager and how things happen within that village is really the brand. I mean, Lynlease and Stockland and Aveo, they're all very important, and I appreciate all of that. But at the Village Glen, the brand is Chaz and me and Jane, because we are empowered to deal with the day-to-day operations, and we've got the luxury of head offices in the village. That makes a huge difference to resident satisfaction, because when I'm sitting around the table in the old RVA days, we used to have a group of the previous past presidents were the complaints group before there was the RRVV, and we used to deal with those things, and we typically found that problems stem from the fact where someone had a complaint, they had no one to talk to in the village, had to write a letter to head office. By the time head office got back, the problem, which could have been solved within 10 minutes, talking to Chaz or me, got to a point where there was lines drawn in the sand, and it was a disaster, a promotional disaster. So my personal view is that we've got work to do with empowering our managers and training our people, particularly with our ageing population, because our average age of entry is increasing. So, I mean, one of the great initiatives of the RLC last meeting was that they formed a partnership with Alzheimer's Australia to introduce training of management and senior people in villages to deal with their residents who are getting dementia, and how you deal with that. And that's very confronting. For those of you who are dealing with people with dementia, I am in our aged care facility, plus in our village. My parents are in that case. They live in our village. I don't know what to do. It's awful. Dementia is a major problem for us, and they're the good things that are coming up. But getting back to the point I'm making, empowering your people to be out there as your best advocates is very important moving forward.
It's always fascinated me that we've always been dearer than the local real estate, and you only get 80% of your money back, and you didn't quibble about it. So we must be doing something right. There must be some things, so those services that we provided. So as I said, way back in '78, we sold our first villa for $26,000. We didn't have the sewer hooked up by the moment. We worked out that the sewer pipes gave us about 2 weeks capacity before we got a pump station working, so we never knew that. So, and the local real estate in that day. Now keep in mind, I don't know your suburbs up here. The peninsula has the rich end, the Portsea and the Sorrentos, etc., and then and the Blairgarries, and then you come down to West Rosebud and Dramana. So the price area in the immediate streets around there at that time, if we were 26, they were 28 to 30. Now where we sell for 400, 350. So we're still achieving probably a 10 to 15% market over. You could go and buy a brand new house or a brand new unit in Rosebud, or you could come to the village. But in the village, you'll pay probably another 80 or 90. Our top unit at present, we're just a nudge under $700,000. So if you went to spend $700,000 in Rosebud, you'd get a pretty palatial place, or close to the water or the beach. So we've always been able to market that much above. We have sister villages in another suburb between us and Melbourne, and they're brand new and $100,000 cheaper than us, and we still sell our villas.
What does this tell you, Chaz?
I just think it tells us that we've got our management right, we've got our respect of the resident right. The resident is the most important person in the village, is the resident, not Peter, not myself. They do everything. They are the life of your village. They dictate how your village would go, how it's going to finally end up. And the day we get a protest resident group in the village, I'm selling it. I've failed. I have failed if I have that.
Could it be something else that it's telling us, which we alluded to earlier in the day, that the residents actually need you? I mean, they do not want to spend more than, $100,000 more than a place down the road. And money is very important to them because, as Peter's just identified, you can't go above 30% of the pension.
Well,
So, do they actually need you as opposed to want your...
I read that on your... look, I think it's a partnership. It's we need them. I've got to pay for the Ferrari, but look, it's a joint effort. We want to give them the product. Look, we're faced with a huge dilemma. We've got people whose payout is say, $250,000. We have a state-of-the-art facility next door that we've spent $40 million on. Our modelling says that we need a $300,000 minimum accommodation bond if we're going to go down the cash flow of the bond. So part of this responsibility is we have to take the resident from the village. I feel I have an obligation. So part of that DMF will be at no charge to them. They'll be able to go into this facility. Now, some of them are lower, and then we get the problem. We've got to really think laterally, because if mum and dad are living in your village and dad needs to go to the nursing home, you're talking before about selling the family home. Suddenly you've got the unit in the retirement village. Mum's got to stay in there. She's contractual. She's on the trial. Where does the service fee come from? Where does the accommodation bond come from? So the person would have to opt for interest. Where does the interest component on a $300,000 loan come from? So there's a big cauldron. We've got to solve that problem so that we fulfil our obligation to the resident that trusted us 30 years ago to look after them. We've got to solve that. So that's a point I feel strongly on. We haven't got the answer yet, except just put them in. I don't want to know about it, and we'll just hope it all works out the other end. So we're not motivated by dollars. We're motivated by satisfaction, and we think we do a pretty good job. And obviously the consumer thinks we do a pretty good job because they pay the figures and they pay. And we work diligently at getting that service fee down. I think that's your biggest challenge out there, is going to be this ongoing cost. There's no more, the government have got no more money. User pays a way of it. Kids are going to be pretty peeved off when you go home tonight and tell them there's no inheritance left. That's it, that's gone. And that's another culture we've got to change, is our Western approach, that we have to leave this inheritance. You know, this should be used for your quality of life. There's a Butte book out, How to Plan Your Estate So the Cheque for the Undertaker Bounces. So, a rest on that.
Perhaps to finish off now, Chaz, you are famous for always having a new joke for every residents' meeting. Do you have a joke for us today?
Yeah. Since I took up golf, I've got lots, but I can't tell them. Okay. Pete and Charlie are good buddies, and they've played golf all their life. And anyway, they're getting a little bit older, and so they have a pact amongst themselves that if one of them dies first, when he goes to heaven, he'll get back in touch with whoever's left behind to just let him know what it's like and are there any golf courses. So fair enough. A couple of years later, Pete dies, and he's gone. Charlie's pretty upset. So he doesn't hear from Pete for a while. Anyway, next minute he gets in touch, and he said, "Oh, good day, how you going?" And Pete says, "Look, I've got some good news and I've got some bad news." And Charlie said, "Oh, God, what's the good news?" "You won't believe heaven. Got the best golf courses in the world. The greens run true, beautiful blue sky. Everything is fantastic." Charlie said, "Well, what's the bad news?" He said, "We're down for a foursome next Saturday." Okay.
Could we please thank Peter and Chaz, who made a special trip up to be with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.